people who are entrepreneurs, people who are, running their, a personal business. It's just them get the same kind of tax benefits that we were giving to corporations as well. Right? This wasn't just about a big corporate tax cut, right? This was about helping entrepreneurs, people in the gig economy. So that was a major success. That 20% deduction is going to expire at the end of this year. That's hundreds of billions of dollars in tax increase on over 25 million small businesses. Like, we cannot allow that to happen. So I think we need to do a better job of articulating the benefits of this, talking about ways we can enhance and expand this, but mostly we need to prevent a tax increase for American people at the worst possible time. So I really am encouraged by the work that you guys are doing, but I do think it's important to keep reminding folks that there was a major benefit here. It helped the economy, and it will be a shot in the arm to not just only extend this, but to make these policies permanent so people don't have to worry about another huge tax increase in the future.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. Taxes are a fact of life in modern America, and generally we accept this responsibility so long as we have a say in it and our money is not being wasted. Long before America was even a country, the colonists were being taxed and wanted a representative in Parliament to voice their concerns. To try and fix the problem, the British Parliament repealed most of the Townshend Act, but left the tax on tea in place. The colonists responded with the Boston Tea Party because they wanted representation to have a say on taxes and other issues they were subject to. As America became its own country and grew, so did its appetite for taxes, and the tax code just grew along with it. So just how big is the tax code today? It is over 6,000 pages. And just for perspective, it only took about 3,400 pages to tell the entire story of Harry Potter. Reducing taxes has been a campaign promise for decades, and some lawmakers have been able to deliver. For example, in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, allowing both businesses and individuals to keep more of their hard-earned money and use it as they see fit. Today's guest worked on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act as part of the Trump administration. I want to welcome Andy Koenig, who is a co-founder and partner of Quinn Consulting, which is a political advisory firm that helps their clients navigate and understand the public policy and legislative world. Andy, welcome.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate you having me, sir. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm so glad you could join us. I mean, you really had a front row seat, being part of the Trump administration, part of the legislative team that really worked directly on this. I think we've reminisced at times. I happen to be part of an AFP group that you all welcomed to the White House when this was just getting started. And it was just so exciting to be able to kind of be enlisted or to kind of be on the team to try to, get this, really consequential program passed and implemented. It was a lot of fun.
Well, you guys are really, really helpful. And that was a key part of getting this thing done, was getting outside groups and getting support that was taking these complicated reforms that you're doing to, as you said, a really big and complex tax code, and explaining how this is going to benefit people's everyday lives and how we're working to simplify and make it better. Obviously, still not perfect, but we really relied on groups like Americans for Prosperity and others to relay that message back to the grassroots and get people excited, which is what got that across the finish line. Especially, it was an interesting time at the White House, because if you recall, the first thing we attempted to do as a big initiative was to repeal and replace Obamacare. And unfortunately, we fell one vote short of that. So we really felt the pressure was on at the time to succeed for President Trump on tax cuts in 2017, if you remember. And I think that the results spoke for themselves before COVID. We can talk about it and stuff like that. But getting that to the finish line was in no small part thanks to the efforts from you guys. So we appreciate it.
Well, I was thrilled for us to be able to be part of that. And we're thrilled to be part of that again, because the proof's in the pudding now. I mean, we've seen that, and how important these reforms have been. And so we're really committed to, doing our part to help people understand that. And hopefully I urge your lawmaker to vote the right way. But hey, before we have a lot of that to talk about, and it's really, that's why we want to talk to you and kind of get a lot of your knowledge and your up-to-date info. But I first wanted to kind of talk about, working in the White House is kind of a fabled thing. And I'm sure it was, an amazing honor for you. what sparked your interest first in politics? What was your pathway to working in the White House?
Yeah, I've always been interested in politics. I can remember in the the mid '90s being we were one of these weird homeschool families, and
we are also a weird homeschool family.
There you go. And I remember going to the gas station around noon in 1996 and having people wonder if they should call the police. But we spent a lot of time listening to Rush Limbaugh on the radio, David. That was economics class when I was in 5th grade for a while. So I've always had an interest in politics. I remember kind of the first campaign that I really paid close attention to was the 92 presidential. If you remember that was exciting, right? With Ross Perot, and I remember asking my mom why people were Republicans and why people were Democrats. And she's like, I think she's trying to give it a down the middle answer. She's like, Democrats want to have, more tax revenue so the government can do more. And Republicans want to, have less taxes and have people do more. I said, who would want higher taxes? People are actually supporting this. So
you're saying that you were a well-raised child.
Yeah. So I was interested in this for a long time. I ended up going to school for political science. I came out here, and I interned at a think tank. I worked on Capitol Hill for 7 years. I started answering phones and returning letters, and ended up working on budget and tax issues, and really got to learn legislation that way. And when you get the call from the White House, I was fortunate enough, and after President Trump won in 2016, to be asked to go work at the Office of Legislative Affairs and kind of take that 8 years experience doing policy on Capitol Hill for members of Congress and work to try to implement the president's legislative agenda. And yeah, it's very cool. We worked in the East Wing, so we walked through the residence of the White House every single day, and it's definitely a career highlight. Something very cool.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So I know early in your career, you worked at the Cato Institute, which, people who listen to this show kind of know that we're fans and ideologically aligned often there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just go into a little more detail, how did you go from interning there to working in the White House? Obviously, you worked hard and people liked you and were smart, but any advice for people, young people who might be listening who would like to walk that path?
Sure. I mean, you can do it. We still work every day on Capitol Hill, and I still love talking to staffers and hearing how they got there. But essentially it's you start building a resume by doing stuff like taking an internship at the Cato Institute. I essentially just went online and applied for it coming out of college. I still didn't really know how I was going to, take a degree like that and put it into practice into a career. And they accepted me. My folks packed up the Crown Vic and drove me out here and dropped me off on the curb, and I took off. And then I spent 6 months there and learned a lot. Worked on a campaign for 6 months, and I came back out to Washington D.C. I took an internship on Capitol Hill, making I think $1,000 a month, and I did that for 6 months, interviewing, learning what was important to know on Capitol Hill. But really, just my dream to get a job on Capitol Hill, and it can be done. I talked to a lot of young kids who are out here, whether they're at Americans for Prosperity or Cato or other think tanks, or in the advocacy space, and saying, how do you do it? And I mean, really, it's as easy as just you starting at the bottom, right? And being willing to push a TV around for some audio visual stuff for members, or respond to letters or answer phones, or no job too small. But if it's something that people are interested in, there's opportunity here, and people can do it. And I loved working on Capitol Hill. And so I started kind of just, writing summaries of small bills, non-controversial legislation. I ended up working issues that are, a little less popular, like, natural resources, like science committee stuff, and then eventually was able to start working on budget issues, taxes, healthcare, and eventually became the policy director for the House Republican Conference under Chairman Jeb Henseling. I got to work for a lot of great members of Congress. I worked for Mike Pence. I worked for Jeb Henseling. I worked for Steve King. And I got to, learn a lot about people who are really committed to the legislative process. So it was a great experience. And, from there, when the White House was forming their staff in Trump's first term, they're looking for folks who are trusted conservatives who had experience actually passing legislation for the legislative affairs team. And so folks I had worked with previously tagged me. And, after about 6 months of vetting, David, and some conversations with the FBI,
Wow.
there you go.
Wow. I'm glad you made it through. Excellent.
Yeah, me too.
It's funny. I think back to what you talked about, how, you just took the jobs that got your foot in the door and then you just kept working hard and taking whatever you could. I reminded, so my path was through working for some governors in Illinois. And at one point I was like the low man on the totem pole in the Chicago governor's office. And, the governor's chief of staff, the governor just coming in office, the chief of staff was like the most sought after man in the state.
Right.
They're very important people were looking for 15 minutes of his time. Well, he would fly into the airport and needed a ride to the office. And so I volunteered to take the car and go get him. And I had, 20, 30 minutes with the chief of staff just once a week or something, driving in the car. And eventually, so he knew who I was. And, hopefully I acquitted myself well. And then eventually I wanted to move to a different role. And he was like, hey, what do you want to do? Okay. And he made it happen. And that was just kind of a way to keep moving.
I mean, me and my friends, because obviously, there's like camaraderie when you're in these jobs coming up. And, we'd always like talk about, it's like the totem pole you move up. It's like, intern, driver, staff assistant, scheduler, legislative assistant, LD, W chief of staff. I'm like, oh man, we're only, 8 slots away from chief of staff. But like when you're young, you're like, it was what, like our goal was. And so, no job too small. But I really, sometimes when you talk to folks, they, it seems these are cool jobs, right? And it's very, very important stuff that we do. And working with these members to create laws and shape the future of this democracy is super important work. But I always want to be like, anybody can do it if you really, you put your mind to it and you put your nose to the grindstone. And you're willing to not make that much money in the beginning of your career. You too can be a legislative assistant.
Yeah. It's super exciting. I lived on Capitol Hill and just thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
So, well, it allowed you now to put your fingerprints in some ways on some really meaningful legislation. And, we're talking about today, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Let's just start from the basics. Like, how should the tax code work?
Yeah, I mean, look, initially, and I think President Trump has highlighted this, when the country was first founded, for the first half of this country until the passage of the 16th Amendment, there was no there was no income tax, right? Most revenue was derived through taxes and fees, but often a lot of it came from tariffs, as the president has talked about, and from other sources of taxation. So it wasn't until the passage of the 16th Amendment and the implementation of the income tax, so with this concept of the government actually reaching into people's paychecks and taking their taxes out before they got it, was even in place. And that was, as you said earlier, to ensure that the government had easier access to tax revenue. So that is a new way of kind of looking at taxation. I always think that what we should be doing when we're talking about taxation is looking for the least amount of money the government can take to most efficiently fund the bare essentials of what a limited government should be doing. And obviously that opinion has evolved over time, and we've gotten to a place where the country's now bringing in over $5 trillion each year from tax revenue. It's still not enough to pay all the bills, and we're still operating with over $1 trillion deficit, potentially even a $2 trillion deficit just this year. And I think that's because the growth and expansion of the federal government and what we should consider, the proper role of the federal government and the efficient way to operate the federal government has grown, certainly. But ultimately, the tax code shouldn't be, in my opinion, something to shape behavior or to punish a certain, industry or to take, actions against political enemies. I mean, this is about trying to take the lowest amount of money we need to fund the most basic government programs in the most efficient, fairest way possible. That's the way I would think about it.
Yeah, I'd totally echo that. It's so tied to the overspending that we see in Washington and around the whole country, really. But that's why I so, encourage with the Doge effort that's been going on. And, that just, even just as a signal, that's been, I think, pretty powerful to refocus legislators and American eye really on like, hey, we have a spending problem and it's hard to address taxes effectively while we're just overspending.
Yeah, and I think it's important to think about the overspending issue. I think, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that, after we passed TCJA, the revenue in this country continued to rise pretty rapidly, David. I think revenue is up around 40% since then. The problem is spending's up 60%, right? And so we can't keep up with the runaway spending, with uncapped and ever-growing entitlement spending, with more people just generally being dependent on the government and the role of the government growing, the number of giveaways to individuals and favored businesses, industries. You look at the IRA and stuff like the Green New Deal, and the rapid expansion of government spending is just it's going to be too much no matter what the tax rate is. So I've always been a fan of letting people keep as much of the money as their hard-earned money as they can, and I think that individuals spend their money a lot more efficiently than the federal government, as we've seen. So I always tend to think that and try to remind people that this country doesn't have a revenue problem. We have an overspending problem. In fact, if you look at the projections of what tax revenue is going to be, when we passed this bill in 2017, it went into effect in 2018. And there were revenue projections from a month before we passed this. And then you can look at what actually happened in terms of how much revenue the federal government brought in total. It's $2.7 trillion higher than the Congressional Budget Office and the experts on Capitol Hill predicted, right? So that means we've got almost $3 trillion more revenue after tax cuts than they projected. And that's with, a global recession caused by the COVID pandemic. And so I think that the tax cuts have been a success story, not just in allowing people to keep more of their hard-earned money, but in the fact that we were actually able to increase revenue more than projections ever said. So, we can talk about how people, what the perception is of the tax cuts and how that was impacted by the pandemic and the unfortunate timing of that for people, like President Trump and those in the White House who passed tax cuts. But I think if you really look at the numbers, it's pretty undisputable that there were benefits both to individuals and also to the budget.
Yeah, $3 trillion is an enormous amount of money. It's not a rounding error, so way to go, CBO, and getting that one wrong. That's incredible. So tell us, how does a big, important initiative like this, a package like this, start and then come together? Because you were on the inside of helping it come together.
Yeah, it's a complicated process, obviously. And, and I think it's a good thing. A lot of what I did in Congress was, because we were there a lot of time during the Obama administration. I was there for the entire Obama administration. A lot of what we spent our time doing was stopping bad legislation from moving forward or trying to mitigate bad legislation. I'm sure you're familiar with cap and trade, stimulus, Obamacare.
The oldies but the goodies, man.
Right. Those are the fights I was.
kept us employed for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. I was on this, no, we're not passing anything side of the, you know what I mean? So when it came time to pass a big complicated bill, I think some Republicans have been out of experience, to be honest with you. So our first effort there was the Obamacare repeal, was ACA. And if you recall, when Trump was sworn into office, we were told by Congress, essentially, we know what we're doing. We've got a plan. You guys are novices. And to be honest, I think a lot of people were surprised when President Trump won, right? And when we came into office in that first term, I'll try to say it kindly, David. I think there was some doubt in the experience level of the administration when it came to being sophisticated about legislative operations. Does that make sense? So, they said, we got this. But what happened is the House moves forward with the bill. The Senate moves forward with a completely separate bill. The White House and the president, who is, I think, inarguably the best messenger to the American people on any of these issues, is not always privy to the policies that the House is going to drop or the disputes that were forming between the Senate and the House. until it was too late, until it was out in the public space where we couldn't really control or talk about it. So I think we were kind of moving in three separate paths on the Obamacare repeal. So as that was starting to fall apart, we and I started working on this in legislative affairs. Like, all right, what's the plan that we could implement to learn lessons in real time from this Obamacare repeal falling apart? And a couple of it was like, we needed better communications with every part of the Republican conference. Like, these are going to be partisan bills, David. That's just the way big bills pass these days, right? And when you have that legislative opportunity, you need to jump. But it's not just every Republican is going to just jump. These aren't monolithic, parties, especially the Republican conference on the Hill, is a big tent place where you have moderates. I used to work for the Republican Study Committee. We used to be the conservatives. Now that wasn't conservative enough. So now you have the Freedom Caucus, right? And so, you have the Tuesday group, you have the Main Street group, you have all these different coalitions of moderates. You have the purple guys. So what we did was, first have a plan. We're going to talk to everybody and have communications with everyone, so no one's caught off guard. Everyone has their opportunity to talk to the Department of Treasury, to talk to the National Economic Council, to talk to Legislative Affairs, and make sure that they feel like they've been heard, and that we're taking ideas from every part of the Hill, and that no one feels like anything has been a surprise from a policy perspective. So we started, with my boss, Mark Shore, with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, with Gary Cohn from the National Economic Council, like going up to the Hill and meeting, we allowed every member of the House and Senate, we gave them the opportunity at some point sit down and talk with us and meet with us. Now, some of these were big groups, some of these were committees, but we made ourselves available to everybody. I think we ended up, having over 200 members of Congress in closed door meetings with these folks, expressing their concerns. That was a big help. And then from a staff level, we worked together, House, Senate, and White House, to come together on what kind of principles we wanted to see from tax reform, and get on the same page before we kind of release the blueprint to the public and make sure that we were messaging this correctly, but that the policies we wanted were all the same. So we were not in a situation where the Senate had a bill, that kept a certain deduction that the House eliminated, or that the standard deduction was the same amount in the House, in the Senate, and the White House bill, and that we all agreed what the corporate rate or the top individual rate should be, or we all knew how much the child tax credit increase was going to be, and we knew where the revenue was coming from. We knew what we wanted to dynamic score. So it was really taking those lessons that we learned from the failure of the Obamacare repeal and applying them in real time, right? Because we started these meetings in May. Obamacare repeal didn't fail until heading into August. But to be quite honest with you, as someone who was there, you could start to see some of the cracks forming in that and moving that large piece of legislation. And we knew even if we were fortunate enough to get that bill to pass, which we were not, we'd still want to do things differently when it came to tax reform. So I hope that, as we face the expiration of a lot of these policies in 2017 and the individual stuff, where the average American family is going to see a tax increase of $1,500 to $2,000 if we don't do something, I hope that the Hill is currently learning those same lessons as well. And after maybe a rocky start with some of the budget votes earlier this year, is starting to work together and speak with one voice on a lot of these issues where there is widespread agreement. And I hope that they take those lessons and apply them as well.
Yeah, we've been trying to beat the drum here on this podcast about highlighting small business owners and families where these tax cuts made a real impact on their lives and how they did business. And we talked to a gentleman who has a company in Ohio. They build towers, and he gave all of his employees a 40% salary increase, and was able to go and buy some more trucks, do things for his business to grow that business, which also added jobs. And he said, look, this was directly because of these tax cuts that I was able to do this and continue to, grow my business. And he's in a small town area in Ohio. He's the largest employer in his area. And I just thought it was such a great example of, like, this is not just partisan bickering. This is things that make a difference in people's lives in a business and in business in America.
Yeah. And I think it's a very important point to make, David, because think about it. It's like, you can argue, and I would argue that we probably didn't do a great job as Republicans of articulating, the individual and specific benefits of these tax cuts to folks. But also, this was, we're going on 8 years ago when this bill passed and all these things happened. And since then, we faced a global pandemic. We faced the forced shutdown of businesses all across the country, losing on purpose almost millions of jobs, 21% inflation under President Biden. So it's pretty easy to understand why people don't necessarily look at their paycheck and go, oh, yeah, I remember those tax cuts. They were great. But, when we really get into the specifics about it, right, the average family saw a tax cut of $1,400. And at this point, after a few years, that tax increase is going to look something more like $2,000 to $2,500 for a family of 5 right now. So that's real money coming out of people's pockets if we don't do anything. In the 28 months after we first passed tax cuts, the economy added 5 million new jobs. In just the first year after tax cuts, the U.S. created 270,000 manufacturing jobs, which is something I know that is very important to a lot of folks right now. If you look at the average median income for families, it grew from 72,000 in 2017 to 78,000 in 2019. These are inflation-adjusted numbers, and that's the highest level that we have ever recorded since the Census Bureau started looking at adjusted median income. So we actually got to, on an inflation-adjusted basis, like the highest median family income of all time in 2019. Again, you have the pandemic, you have inflation, which impacts that. But this is where we want to get back to. And the worst possible thing after the pandemic, after inflation, is to hit people with another tax increase, right? Because inflation essentially is just a hidden tax increase, right? Like you're working harder to get less. And the last thing anybody needs right now is a tax increase. So that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting for small businesses, as you said, right? We put a 20% small business deduction into TCJA to make sure that people who are entrepreneurs, people who are, running their, a personal business, it's just them, get the same kind of tax benefits that we were giving to corporations as well. Right? This wasn't just about a big corporate tax cut, right? This was about helping entrepreneurs, people in the gig economy. So that was a major success. That 20% deduction is going to expire at the end of this year. That's hundreds of billions of dollars in tax increase on over 25 million small businesses. Like, we cannot allow that to happen. So I think we need to do a better job of articulating the benefits of this, talking about ways we can enhance and expand this, but mostly we need to prevent a tax increase for American people at the worst possible time. So I really am encouraged by the work that you guys are doing, but I do think it's important to keep reminding folks that there was a major benefit here. It helped the economy, and it will be a shot in the arm to not just only extend this, but to make these policies permanent so people don't have to worry about another huge tax increase in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, we're going to keep doing our part, and our folks are all around the country are doing a lot. We had 60 events on tax day, in fact, just to keep driving this message.
That's great.
Before we wrap up, I do want you to tell us a quick story from an insider perspective. My understanding, we all know that President Trump is probably one of the best marketers in the country. It's probably not hyperbole to say that, but he wanted to call this bill something else. What was that, and why did it not make it through?
Yeah, I can't imagine this to your producer, but it does. I think it's an interesting anecdote, just in that fact that it does. It's another reason to remember we need to do our best to try to explain complicated issues to folks in a simple way. And as we're trying to sell this, I think we should make sure that we are using messaging that people can best understand. But yeah, as we were coming together to put the tax package together with a lot of complicated issues, as we've discussed in the legislative text of the bill, and the White House said, anything you need us for. And they said, look, your boss is the best. This is the folks on Capitol Hill and the House and the Senate. It said, your boss is the best marketer around. Like, we need to think about, what we're going to call this bill. And so this message was relayed back to the Oval. I was not in the room when this occurred, but the note coming out was that the president had come up with the name, and we were going to call it cut, right? And you could just see it. You could see the folks at the rallies, and people can understand. What did this bill do? Well, cut. Like, what happened to our taxes? Cut. I was like, this is great. All in. Let's do it. We take it back to Capitol Hill. And I think that, they have a older school look at these kind of things. They're stuck to their acronyms. So they come back and they say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to call this thing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which now hyphenates to a TCJA, or some people call it TCJA, or what it is something that the average American has no time, interest, or capacity to sit and understand, because it's one of these stupid DC acronyms. So I always think about how much easier this would be if we were, telling people cut, let's extend cut, and then just like, let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. Let's do what we can to message it. But I do think it's like, it's always funny is that I think back of that, where our friends, our bureaucratic swamp creatures here in DC decided to call this thing some incomprehensible name, and we're still dealing with as we try to sell it and make it permanent. But that's the law we were given. So hopefully, the White House will continue to lead on this front and really be the chief messengers for why we need to get this bill done, and work closely with the House and the Senate and groups like you to make sure that we make this permanent, so people aren't faced with a huge tax increase, at the end of this year. So cut, David.
Yeah. All right. Let's go. Now we have our marching orders.
Yeah.
So, well, Andy, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and giving us more insight on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. I really enjoyed this look behind the scenes of how the bill came together, how it got passed, and the importance of why we need to pass this for families and businesses. So I really want to encourage, everyone who's a viewer or a listener, you can contact your legislator, and tell them, we need to pass this quickly. We can't kind of keep extending it out. We really need to pass this because it's crucial for the families and especially for our economy.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, just to think about that timeline too, right? The hard decisions, I think, are, the Congress is away on Easter break right now. I think when they get back and start sitting down with the White House, that's when a lot of these real hard decisions have to get made, David. And I think that, May and June are going to be a big month for this. This bill also, hopefully include a lot of spending cuts going to reduce the size and scope of government, hopefully have initiatives to help streamline energy permitting. So this is going to be a big piece of legislation. Could do a lot for the economy, but these next few weeks and months are really going to be the most important time. So I'd encourage anybody to work with you guys, to reach out to their representatives and tell them to get it done, because I think it's really important to try to get this done before, the August recess. So it's going to be a big push, and we appreciate all your help.
Awesome. Well, thanks for what you're doing too, Andy. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks. Well, friends, if you want to stay connected with the podcast, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take them for granted. Go out there and defend liberty and freedom. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.